me okay?
Yes.
Awesome. Thank you for having me here. I was joking that it was like a perfect example of reframing a design problem. Like we were looking from here and we just needed to like Google Maps pinch it out a little bit and be like, oh, actually there's two of these parking lots and they look exactly the same. It was a good time. It was a good time. We were probably better friends now than we would have been if we hadn't gotten lost in the parking lot. Well, I'm super excited to be here. I already said hello, but that's me saying hello. So thanks to Dwayne, Helen, Alicia, and the whole AIGA Colorado chapter for having me here. Very exciting. What I'm going to talk to you about today starts with this little print that I made. It sits inside a frame. It's pretty small. And this is part of a side project for me. That's kind of what I'm going to talk to you about today, this idea of side projects. So this side project was really a series of statements, screen printed in black on 8x10 paper. Screen printing was very important to me. I'm sure you're looking at this and thinking, like, why didn't you just laser print that thing, you idiot? Nobody can tell. They don't understand why you're trying to charge so much money for that photocopy. And you might be right. But it was so important to me because it's not black. It's mixed with just a little bit of blue. Again, no one will know. So this is why it's a side project. So there's a few more of these. They look like so. The color choices for the paper was basically, I want really bright paper. I remember French paper having really bright paper. Let's go look at their really bright paper. It turns out only 3 of the really bright papers are actually really bright, and there's some other ones they kind of like give the same name and cluster in there, but they're not really like fluorescent, which is kind of a bummer. So you have fluorescent pink, fluorescent green, fluorescent blue. They have more clever names, something tone, glow something, whatever. And then you have like yellow, but that's all right. So you got these four prints. I like to play with language a lot. We'll get there. This kind of has relevance to some other stuff. But the origin of these was actually, I went back to this Tumblr that I kind of like have vaguely been posting things to for a long time. You're not intended to read things here, so don't worry. This is just that generic Tumblr archive view that they've never changed and seems to be okay. Like everything about me gets like so sexy. You can get such great Tumblr themes, and then you go to the archive view and it always looks like this. So I went back to this Tumblr archive where I basically have hundreds of similar bits of language like this, like little chunks of things that I decided to write down. They're kind of like tweets, I guess, in some way, but packaged up differently in a separate place. Things I think of, or maybe I see something and like remix it and post it there. And I've always liked this idea of kind of reusing that stuff I made. Like the idea of just putting it there and letting it be feels a little pointless. I don't know. So I was like, I should go back there and mine that archive of ideas I had 4 years ago and do something else with it. And thus where these sort of little turns of phrase come from. There's this interesting sort of point of inspiration for me. You guys might be familiar with this company that, well, they used to be called 37 Signals. They changed their name to Basecamp because they make this thing called Basecamp. Yeah. But there's this thing that they do really, really, really well, which is use the exhaust of all their efforts to do a bunch of other stuff. They've published several books. And if you take a good hard look at those books, they're really well edited, packaged up versions of blog posts that they've made previously. And if you look at those blog posts that they're posting, they're really just giving a narrative to their day-to-day working or things they've learned and how they work. And they've done a very good job of sort of taking, it's like when you're, it's like particle board or one of these sort of materials, right? Where you like saw a piece of wood and then you use the stuff that comes off to make something else. They're like constantly doing that. And I love that idea. So I think about that a lot as a kind of a point of inspiration. I sell these in my Etsy shop. This is not a suggestion you go buy them. That's just a point of the story. Just a little detail. But I was looking at these not that long ago, and it made me think about this idea of side projects more. Like, I've sold some of these, but this isn't it's not really a commercial endeavor. It's mostly for myself. And why do I feel compelled to make something like that? And in fact, why have I felt compelled to make many different things like that, creating more sort of work for myself if you view it through that lens, spending a bunch of money on stuff that, who knows, right? Why do I do that? So I was thinking about side projects, like why do we make them? And I think the first reason, at least for me, maybe you can relate to this, is to just express stuff. Like there's something in me, I want to get it out, so I gotta like make something. When I was much younger, I used to be music. I couldn't like wait to bang on a guitar and write a song. They were all terrible, I promise you. There's just some compulsion to get some idea out there, even if it's some fragmented half sentence with poor grammar, centered all caps in black on a bright rectangle of color. The next thing was, sometimes I take on these projects to learn something, just to force myself to do something I haven't done before. And that could be something technical or have some sort of like conceptual thing. Is there some skill or something that I'm not engaging otherwise, but I feel like I'd like to? I invent some reason to go do that thing in order to learn it. That's one. Now I was talking with other people about this idea, and this one actually comes up a lot, is the idea of control, right? You have kind of this thing you do all the time that someone else tells you to do, or some set of circumstances determine you have to do it this certain way. Oh, the man, the context, the job, the boss, blah, blah, blah. Of course. And you're like, I have my other thing where I get to control it all myself. I just want to make it my own and hold on to it. And there's some like some satisfaction in that, or not having to explain it, or not having someone question it. Blah, blah. Some people, in a source from like the vantage point I have at Etsy, I see this a lot. A lot of people do side projects with the intent to make money off them, right? But what's interesting is when you think of them as side projects and sort of emotionally treat them that way, it can sometimes be difficult to then make money off them. So it's like a funny mixed set of intents. But some people do it to earn money. And there's this other interesting thing that happens where you end up, they become a social tool in a way. It's like another, again, I'm speaking for sort of myself personally. There's something to talk about that sort of isn't of yourself, but is close to yourself. It's not, the town you grew up in, what you had for dinner yesterday. I don't know, my favorite coffee shop in my neighborhood. Some other boring thing the person doesn't really care about. You can say, oh, so what do you do? Well, I'm working on this project. Like this already gets kind of interesting, right? Maybe this is also, you get close to a certain community of people who kind of work this way, and everybody's talking about their side projects. But, so, okay, take a quick detour. You have this sort of idea of the side project, which I vaguely and incompletely explored conceptually in that bulleted list just a moment ago, which sort of has this counterpoint, which is your not side project. For me, that's Etsy. So I sort of introed you to these prints for just a few minutes that I sell on Etsy. And there's tons of things like, in fact, I saw this beautiful thing on Tumblr the other day, which somebody had, it was like accidents, grotesque, left a line, whatever. But what it said was like, take a quote, set it in black text on white, you can sell it on Etsy, whatever. It was great. It was a perfect critique of exactly that stuff, which I'm kind of a sucker for. Look, I have this sketchbook here. It's basically the same idea. I wrote a book. The cover basically is the same idea. I'm not, well, we can talk about that later. So Etsy is my not side project. And I'll tell you a little bit about Etsy. I mean, this will be pretty brief in my role there, but it sets the context for some of this other stuff in funny ways. One, the context I'm working in, I'm doing this stuff, which may be interesting, but also some funny connections that happen for other side projects that are, I didn't realize until really looking in hindsight. So how many of you are familiar with Etsy? This is good, okay. How many of you are not familiar with Etsy? Please be someone. Yes, oh my gosh, this part's for you. Hi, what's your name?
Irma.
Irma?
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Randy. Okay, Irma, the next 2.5 minutes are for Irma. Okay. Etsy's a website. Etsy's a community of people. Etsy, you can go down the company mission path and be like, Etsy is a state of mind. And that's I believe all these things, but I won't give you that sort of spiel right now. Etsy was founded in Brooklyn in 2005, and had some pretty humble origins. Started in an apartment like any other little startup. And since 2005, the community on Etsy has been selling handmade and craft manufactured products, vintage goods, and supplies for making. So they open up their own, open up their shop, list an item, 20 cents to list an item. We take a transaction fee when you sell that item. That's the basic business mechanic. And so this has been going on for almost 10 years now. We have over 30 million members at Etsy, over 1 million sellers in 200 countries. Essentially, anywhere there's internet access, there is an Etsy seller, at least one, which is pretty fun to see. There's over 25 million unique items available for purchase on Etsy, like right now, which is, again, kind of crazy. And to give you a sense of the sort of scale of this as well, a lot of this is sort of happening in the context of really, really rapid growth. These numbers here, these dollar numbers, represent the amount of merchandise sold on Etsy, what we call gross merchandise sales. So, and actually last year in 2013 it was $1.3 billion, which is kind of crazy. Yeah, it's pretty incredible. But there's this other really, really important detail. So I put that number up here because you go, wow, that's a big number. Oh, good win. Presentation win. So that transaction fee we take is only 3.5%. So 96.5% of that $1.35 billion is going to the artists, designers, collectors who are selling their wares on Etsy. It's pretty awesome. It also is kind of a model that is predicated on the idea that a bunch of people would do this, right? Like Etsy couldn't work if we didn't have some kind of massive scale, because no other reasonable business would operate on only making 3.5% of every transaction. But we are an unreasonable business. Also, the company has grown over that period of time, right? So about 600 people now that work at Etsy. And then, of course, there's a sort of whole passionate community of people surrounding it, and they're really the reason any of this happens. So my role at Etsy is I am the creative director. I lead a team of a little over 60 people now across, at least the way we think about it, across 4 disciplines. And those are what we call product design, which is the design of the software product, the website. What we call brand design, which is really all the communication, graphic design, art direction, illustration, all these things. Research, which is a group that does both usability and user experience research, as well as market research, really looking at sort of opportunities. And another group we call brand marketing, which is really the sort of marketing strategy, also includes social media, editorial, things like that. So in some sense, like this whole kind of experience, like all these touch points that people have with Etsy kind of fall under this purview, right? From the website, native apps. And we do things like create experiences out in the world. This is a store that we ran for 10 days in Soho in December of 2012. Yeah, and I love to see this white light here. Now this isn't actually the Dior store. It's like one. That's entrance to people's apartments, very expensive apartments. They were surprisingly okay with all the rock music we would have in here at night. But just to the right of that is this Dior store, and I loved the like warm, beautiful light coming out of this Etsy store. And there's this other thing that was basically empty and looked like a gallery, and like everybody was dressed in black, and it was kind of sad. And there was like really white light coming out of it. I was like, yes, it's such a good image. So we create experiences like this. This is the first time I'd done anything like this, or Etsy had done anything like this. And when we were doing the breakdown of this space, the team who was sort of taking it all apart, were joking that we had built like an actual store, not a pop-up store, which, in hindsight, we should have done something different. But it was real nice for those 10 days, let me tell you. But on top of the idea, I mean, you could imagine what's happening inside. It was products for sale. There's some people making things, demoing techniques and stuff like that. But on top of that, we're kind of layering in all these other things that make something like that shopping experience look or feel like Etsy. So there's lectures and education. That's Eric Harvey. That's the guitarist of Spoon. He played like a surprise show one night. We had these cocktail workshops, free haircuts. Because why not, right? When would you walk into a store and then end up getting a free haircut? Like, exactly. And of course, the design team also does a lot of fun stuff for the sort of Etsy employee community. This is some sort of vaguely under the radar stuff we distributed for the Etsy talent show that we do each year. Yeah, so you can see it takes on maybe a different personality when we can talk to our colleagues. So that's the context in which I'm doing some of this work, and this the experiences I had at Etsy really led me to this other project, which is this book. But before we get there, I'm going to tell you about this book. It's an ugly book. It's kind of amazing. This book I found probably 6 months ago, and this book was a little project that I made in, let's see, maybe I might have even written the date down here. Does it say inside? Hold on, we'll find this. I made this in probably 2005, I think. And this pattern on the outside is one of those free download tiled background, make a GIF. Like you'd put in 2 colors and it'd spit out this thing that you could put in the background of your website and tile around. You could imagine what was happening around that period of time. You know the ones I'm talking about. It's like super pixelated. And so at the time, I was taking these like printmaking and bookmaking classes, and the people teaching the classes were really into just the sort of book arts, and that had a kind of established vocabulary about how you do a lot of these things. It really, like the texture of the papers, tearing the side edges, and you'd see all the fibers stuff, and like my only mission was to like make a book by hand that did not look like it was made by hand. I was like, how crisp and clean and perfect can I make this thing? It's basically on like laser printer paper, very, very carefully bound. But it's not just sort of an empty book. It's got this sort of content in it. So this comes back around to this like playing with words. Again, I'll say 2 things, 2005, and I was much younger, so I'd apologize for any of this. So I decided to do, I'm not even sure where the original inspiration came from, it was essentially like sample nursery rhymes, and like old nursery rhymes, and put them in the context of what I thought was sort of like the technology of the moment, right? Put them in this book. So it's like this little book I called Forced Quip, Poetry for Children of the Information Age. I proudly used a personal logo in 2005. So there's that. Also, I found this piece of paper in the bag, and I don't actually know if this was about this project or not, but we'll just pretend it was. It says, well, it's got my name. Concept, good. You understand? Also, if I could show you this, the words at the beginning are in bold, and they have a colon, and there's a handwritten little note next. This is clearly like the teacher or something. I really don't remember this. Concept, good. Materials, nice, and then a scribbly. Choice that fits the overall appearance. Good, yes. Whichever, maybe it was the content choice, I agree. And execution, very clean and precise. That's what I was going for. Yeah. Overall, I think it says 10, but it might also say so. And then over here on the right-hand side, it says class grade, A-. Not too bad, not too bad. All right, so as the title page. There we go. I do have the date, 2003. That's when I made this thing. Shit, God, that was a long time ago. Pre-Gmail, just for context here. So I was working at a studio at the same time as I was in school, taking these classes. A design studio, and I was like really having this sort of like tension, because at the studio I was like the guy who did the web stuff. I was like, we're a graphic design studio, and also like that kid. I was that kid. And then I would go and do these classes, like I was saying, the sort of whole book arts thing, which I like respected, but just wasn't how I got my kicks. And so there's like this tension between these things all the time. You can see here my attempt at very perfect hand binding up there at the top. I tried. And of course, I'd wrap all these things in something so you couldn't see the binding at all, right? Because who wanted that? Come on. It wanted it to, it was like an aspiration to have this, like to make this appear like it was some commercially made product. It's so strange. So I'll show you the table of contents. You'll get a sense of what's going on in here. They all share their original titles. I thought I would read to you a couple of these. I think you'll appreciate them. I've flagged them off here. So we have Little Miss Muffet. You're probably familiar with that one. We have Little Miss Muffet sat in her ergonomic task chair, typing away the day on her comfort keyboard, experiencing little discomfort or fatigue. All right. Maybe I'll read you a couple others. I'll skip over, yeah, there you go. It is, right? I'll skip over the man from Nantucket. No, it's. I don't think it actually is. So this is an interesting one. This really speaks to the sort of the pitfalls of the internet. If I remember right, I searched for like classic nursery rhymes or something like that, and I got this one. I was not familiar with it. I was like, I'll do a version of that. That sounds fun. After I made this book, everybody's like, I've never heard of that before. It like totally lost its effect because all of these were supposed to be familiar things reinterpreted. However, it's kind of a fun one. It's long though. Are you familiar with this? What are little boys made of? Are you? You are. Now, see, you're shaking your head. No, I'm with. You and me are on the same page. Yeah. What are little boys made of? What are little boys made of? There's 2 lines of this. I don't know how you deliver this. Right? Portable video games and time-traveling superheroes. That's what little boys are made of. Yeah. What are little girls made of? I'm realizing the sort of sexism built into this thing. Don't hate me. Again, 2003. What are little girls made of? What are little girls made of? Smart dolls and distributed learning experiences. That's what little girls are made of. What are young men made of? What are young men made of? Network security and instantification. That's what young men are made of. What are young women made of? What are young women made of? Target markets and data collection services. That's what young women are made of. A dill or a dollar. A dill or a dollar, a 10 o'clock scholar. Why do you come so soon? You used to come at 10 o'clock. Now you telecommute. All right. So now that we've enjoyed the, of course you have to have the colophon because you're a designer. These are also this like I think what it says right here. What's FF Urban? I'm sure this is a free download. Naming the paper source. Some more French paper companies. 15 copies have been hand-bound, of which you are holding number 1. I'm pretty sure this is the same number. Let's see. It's curious. Knowing myself, actually, I wouldn't be surprised if I actually only made like 5 of these. The class was like, you need to make 15, then the teacher would only be like, hand in 1. So you kind of learn that over time, right? I don't know where this was in the course, but there's probably not 15 of this. All right, so I'll take you to this next project. This one doesn't really involve words the same way. Well, you'll probably start to see some of the connections I saw too. So I had this idea for a long time that I wanted to chip away at to make these drawings, as I called them. And I'll explain sort of the quotes in a minute. You could probably recognize what this is. Yeah. So this, well, I'll describe the details in just a minute. This drawing's called Welcome to Facebook. I made this series of drawings. I think I'm going to show you 4 of them. There's maybe 6 in 2009. See, there's these big 36 by 24 digital prints. I was starting to think about these, like the websites we were building even then were, we were redesigning stuff we'd made previously, and they were sort of going away, right? And I kind of remember what they were like before, but not quite. Here's what the sort of concept is going. I was like, I want to kind of capture a vague memory of what this thing was, but not the exact memory of it. Like, how can I get a picture of what that website was kind of like. So it's got all the symbolism that helps you understand what it is, right? But it's not really what it looked like at all. And then, of course, I don't know, because it's a side project and you can do what you want, I kind of wrapped in some other contextual things, right, to capture what's sort of acknowledging that what's on the internet doesn't last forever. Now, people will tell you that it does, and in some cases that's true. I went recently to the Wayback Machine and looked at AIGA.org. So you get that, right? It remembers that part of it, whatever that is. None of the content, none of the stuff that really matters, right? Thanks, Wayback Machine. So the internet's memory isn't really complete either, which I think is kind of interesting. Like, I have this vague memory of what something was like, so does the Wayback Machine. But like, maybe incomplete is okay. So I started thinking about these things as kind of this more human version of the Wayback Machine. Here's another one, maybe a little less familiar. Again, I'm showing you, I don't claim that these are good drawings as drawings. We're talking about the idea of these drawings. Basically a bunch of scribbles. This one is Join Friendster. So also the title of these drawings are the page titles that these pages were when you would go visit them. So these are the sign-in screens, or the sort of the initial screens. Oh, come on. Yeah. No, it's great, and I love this. This is so good. So this one's called A Place for Friends. This is MySpace. What's amazing is those other ones are like, Join Friendster, welcome to Facebook. Like, in hindsight, look how much more sort of poetic this is, right? You're at MySpace, and they're not like, you are at MySpace, sign up. They're like, MySpace, a place for friends. Like, if only Facebook had like this sort of layer of personality in the product experience itself, it'd be kind of awesome, right? And then, so those are all social networks. This is another one I did because it's sort of like a sentimental thing. This sort of happened in the middle of me working on these. Man, I don't know if anyone would guess this one, but someone should try. Zynga, interesting, yeah? No, you probably guess. I mean, this is like a false setup in some ways. This one's called GeoCities is Closing. So that's the title of this page. This is after Yahoo had bought GeoCities stuff. It's kind of amazing. There's like the Yahoo logos up there in the upper left, and then like this little black thing that says GeoCities next to it. So the other, I like this one the best actually, just like a formal thing. I don't know, it's less scribbly. The colors are super fun in this one. I'll talk in a second about how like those sort of colors happen. It's funny, now I've come back to these, enough time has passed, I actually really like this one. But so I'll explain this to you because this goes into the side project territory stuff too. That's like a little bit crazy. So what I would do is screen capture the site, make a note of what the page title was and the browser title. And then do you remember this piece of software called Painter from Corel? Oh yeah, and there was a moment in time where Corel had basically been displaced, right? Like Adobe had all the better products. There's this one thing that they made that was like better than anything else, and it was Painter. Oh my God, it was so good. The brushes were so real. They were so much better than Photoshop. This is like a very short window of time. It was probably like 24 months or something. And I loved it. It was like the coolest, most fun program to use. So I would import these screen captures into Painter, and I'd just blow it up really big. It didn't matter that this was like a little screen res thing, and I wanted to make this big thing, so I'm kind of like drawing over top of it. So essentially, the setup is like you're basically going to trace this website, and then I would go in with the eyedropper, and I would select pixel colors underneath of it, and then draw with those pixel colors. But what's beautiful about that is, of course, like all the colors you're seeing on screen are made up of pixels of other colors. So you see, like in that crazy GeoCities thing, it wasn't like bright pink and green at all, but like when you get at the pixel level and sample the color and then use it, you sort of turn this thing that was kind of lame into these like really bright, fun colors. And then I take this marker tool that looked so real. It looked so much like you just took a, not quite a Sharpie marker, but like maybe like one of those little Pantone markers or something, It looked so real. If you got the scale right and printed it out the right scale, it was like so believable, and it all came out of this digital piece of software. So I would trace it all using this marker thing. I'd print it on this really like toothy paper, and then I'd like hang them up, and I was super proud of myself. It's so funny. But what's interesting, and I realized like looking back at this, that this is a whole lot like how I plan stuff when we're working on web products. This is I found these again not too long ago. These are probably from my first maybe 2 weeks at Etsy, like almost 5 years ago. And I went through this sort of conceptual exercise, which was like, what if X was Etsy? And I just fill in the blank with some other website and try to like sort of borrow all the architecture of everything that was going, however they would organize stuff, even if it wasn't like a shopping site or something. So I'd say like, what if Vimeo was Etsy? Like, let me borrow that whole structure and like shove products in there, kind of as a starting place, like a weird point of inspiration. And these are definitely early sketches or these are maybe one iteration past, because I see myself trying to do things like, what if this thing slides over here? You can see my vague arrows. Yeah, these are terrible. These are like really, but this is basically how I try to communicate my ideas. It seems to work okay. What do I have over here? For Tuesday, 3 versions, question mark. Yeah, at least in form, these things are not that far off. Okay, so now I'm going to talk to you about this other book for a second. Different kind of book. I already held it up, but this is what it looks like. You might say, why, Randy, would you show me this incredibly blurry picture zoomed in really close? And I would say to you, it's because then I want to go like this and tell you that it's the photo my mother texted to me when she found my book at the bookstore and then placed it by this Mother's Day promotion. Yeah, it's awesome. I also like the guy who's like, he's taking my picture. So, in one sense, I'd always wanted to write a book, which feels like a funny thing to say, although I realize I kind of have this bucket list of projects, and it's not like I wanted to write a book about the work I do, or I wanted to like write a novel. It was just like, I want to write a book. Like, probably been thinking about this for 15 years or something. Book, want one. But what happened is I started to have these experiences inside Etsy that started to feel to me like very unique experiences that sort of, I was realizing that peers of mine were in similar situations but hadn't been like exposed to this sort of insight or something. We were having these conversations kind of all the time. Whatever, meet up for drinks with our friends from Foursquare and Tumblr or whatever, and like talk shop or something. And I realized like there's actually not something talking about this the way we're sort of working through it right now. This will be great. I'm going to like capture this experience and share it with people. So my attempt here is to explain this thing that we've been calling product design. Maybe we can save that for the Q&A. Some people find that to be a troubling set of terminology, but for us it's really about building like a software product. Okay? So I wanted to like share what I was learning at Etsy. I started this project in the summer of 2012, and then the book was published in November of 2013. Now you could read that and say, man, it took whatever 14 months to write a book. But if you're like me, you start it and you're like, yeah, I'm gonna write this book, and those first like 2 months are like, it's great. And you're like, oh, we got some time before that thing's due. So there's like a good, if you were to graph it, it definitely goes like that, and then it comes back up. Although thankfully it wasn't that sort of rush at the end. Once I get disciplined, I get pretty disciplined. So I just want to sort of open it up for a second and share with you just a few of these things. So the subtitle of the book is The Principles of Building and Releasing Web Products. And I'll just share with you a few of these sort of principles, like these thematic buckets. So the first one is probably also the most important one. People matter most. I made these sketchbooks. Maybe when we do this raffle later, whoever gets these books can get one of these People Matter Most sketchbooks too. Very good. Although I've churned through sketchbooks really fast, and so I use these, and I kind of feel bad like throwing them away. I don't save my sketchbooks. Like, it's got like this feels so good to me and so sentimental, and then I'm like, but that's an aside. People matter most. And this is something that I've really learned sort of at so many levels or layers of the Etsy experience. I mean, without the Etsy community, like it just wouldn't exist, right? It's sort of very basic and kind of obvious thing to say, but it can be easy inside the context of a busy, fast-moving company with complex problems and blah, blah, to get really focused on the problem right in front of you. And it actually doesn't matter at all if the people aren't on the other side of it. It's one of these things to keep reminding ourselves that the people on the other side are sort of the reason it exists. The other is I've really come to be sort of heavily relationship focused in how I approach design. Like sort of everything is about the individual relationship with the designers and their relationship with other people in the teams. And anywhere there's a problem, it's usually about like the relationship between two people somehow, right? They might not put it in those terms, but whether it's a communication problem or misaligned vision, and so I've become like very, very, very people focused, which is also, I mean, it's probably a proxy to saying like become a manager or something, but I like that. It works for me. And then also we lean on relationships a lot and other people's sort of knowledge to help us figure this stuff out. Like a lot of the things we're trying to do there aren't sort of examples just sitting out there that you can kind of reference. So we're having to sort of reach deep inside other companies and figure out like what they're doing, what they did last week to address that problem, because it doesn't really sort of exist out in the world in the other way. So it's trying to communicate that like sort of in all these ways being people-oriented is primo. I'm gonna grab some water here. The second one here is that nothing is precious. It's kind of it's a related point. If we're saying sort of the people matter most, in some ways I'm saying the thing we're making matters less than most. We try not to take any of the stuff we make and put out in the world sort of too seriously. One reason is that it can change. We're working in a medium with a software product that's totally fungible. We can change it tomorrow if we want to. And so if we do something and it is wrong, or we do something and we learn it can be better, we actually have the ability to change that. So we try not to sweat it too much. But the other thing in this mindset that I think is really important is it sort of encourages you to, or it allows you to think about the long-term effects and not really worry so much about the short-term ones. We're like much more interested in playing the long game and investing in the long results. And we could like bicker about this thing that's going to happen next week over the next few months. But we're much more interested in the results that we're going to have 2 years from now, 3 years from now, 20 years from now, whatever it might be. So I'll kind of give you an example of sort of fungibility. A typical kind of product development process might look something like this, where you sort of put all this effort into making the thing up front. You have these great ideas. You try 3 versions. You show them to your boss. They like that one. They say combine these two. Blah 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 blah. You do a bunch more work. You do a bunch more work. You do a bunch more work. This is not how we work. I'm just making a story. And so you have all these like cycles, and then your thing might go into production, right, or something. You have like all the ideas and all the stuff. Now we're gonna like make it the actual thing. You spend a whole bunch of time developing it, and then at some point in the future, long after you came up with those ideas or did anything, you may have the opportunity to figure out if this thing worked or not. The problem with this entire process is that it assumes that you're right. I don't know about you, but I'm wrong more often than I'm right. It's a pretty like dangerous place to be if your working process is basically predicated on the assumption that you're right all the time and you're often wrong. Sort of instead of doing this thing where you're doing all this work when you don't know anything, and risk is really high, like sort of how can you reframe the working process so that you learn about your ideas much quicker and then can change them. Again, right? Nothing is precious, so who cares? We can change the idea. I'm not invested in the first idea if it didn't work. So when you're working this way, you don't really have a clear idea if all that blue design thing you did up front works or not. And really the approach is very simple. It's basically to take this whole thing and compress it down into much less risky, much less expensive, much less like heavily weighted and emotionally charged in time and energy spent on things, into these really short cycles where you come up with ideas, you make some stuff quickly, and you see if it works. And then if you learn that it doesn't work, you just change it. no big deal because nothing's precious. You sort of set that expectation up front. It's much more, what's interesting is it encourages more risk-taking because it, one, it says it's okay to be wrong, and it kind of encourages you to make mistakes, right? If you're in an environment where you don't feel comfortable making mistakes, then you will do the safe thing and not take risks, and then you won't come up with interesting ideas or maybe solve the problem in a new way that might be better. It's a really simple conceptual switch. It's kind of hard to do in practice, but it is a practice, so you kind of get there over time. And it relates to this other concept, which I'll share quickly, which is basically that the product is never done. Right, so one, the thing is not precious, so we can change it all the time. This related principle sort of describes that we should keep changing it. We're not actually finished at any point. So we might be able to improve functionality, reduce complexity, make something faster, make it more satisfying. There's all these things that can always be better about it, and we just sort of accept that. Knowing that from the beginning, the sort of expectation setting for yourself and everyone working on these things sort of removes that anxiety or tension where you sort of like have the thing, and then you're like, oh, that part's no good, or now we're going to do the next version. Like, but I just spent all that time working on the first version. Like no, exactly, right? That's you have to sort of flip that around. We should expect to continue working on the thing. It's much more. It's like a mindset of like a living, breathing organism as opposed to a sort of static artifact. Sort of treat it that we work that way. New opportunities might arise. The world may change around you, and you just keep shifting with it. So that's just 3 of the 11, I believe, principles in my book. You can find it on Amazon. Or you can find it at Barnes & Noble next to the Mother's Day gifts. So I'll talk to you about these side projects and my not side project. And sort of my project that starts to be a side project almost extracted from the project. I think this thing that people often try to do, and again, I see this a lot at Etsy, is they want to find a place where these things are sort of one and the same, where you're doing the thing that you would have done on your side. And in some ways for me that might be true. There's this idea of like craftsmanship and technology that's been like threaded through all these things. There's some degree of kind of making commerce. There's some degree of this reliance on sort of language and these conceptual things, or sort of a million other things. I actually think that the separation between the two is really healthy, and I don't know if I'm bought into this sort of particular pursuit, but I think it's a super interesting idea. Sort of tension between your sort of core endeavor and your like side endeavor. But enough about me. I'd love to talk to you about your projects over beer. And I just want to say thank you again for having me. So thank you, Denver. And I believe we're going to do some time for Q&A, which can be about side projects or not, or Etsy or not, I don't know. Happy to answer almost anything, I think. I hope somebody pushes the edge of almost anything.
And if you have a question, even if you're up front and Randy can hear you, still wait for the microphone because people in the back may not be able to hear you. That being said, Jenny would like the microphone first.
You mentioned that Etsy has a talent show every year.
That's
Can you tell us more about that?
We have, sure. We have had 3 now, so that's 3 years running. We rent out this rock venue in Brooklyn and bring a bunch of food in, and for about 4 hours or so, we have a long series of acts. There's lots of things you'd imagine. Singer-songwriter, people have a band they put together, but there's definitely been knife juggling, stand-up comedy, lots of dance routines. The dance routine thing actually seems to be growing. There's probably like a trend there. Super fun. Everybody participates. It was really basically our CEO was like, I always wanted to do something like this, so I'm just gonna do it. No, so that's it's funny. We're a really open and transparent company, but that's definitely one of the moments that I think people would not necessarily feel comfortable. There's a lot of alcohol, and there's a lot of people really sincerely doing things that aren't good, which is what makes it awesome to experience. But also, they probably don't want it to live out in the world forever. Yeah. It was just summoned.
Okay. So your first principle was people matter most. And I guess as the creative director of Etsy, you've run quite a few areas. You mentioned 4 that really span everything, I think, except revenue. And
no, that's not, I mean, there's a lot of other stuff, but yeah.
But no, I mean, it really seems like a lot. And
Yeah.
I guess when you say people, when you're thinking about the work you do at Etsy, are you thinking about the makers first in your role, or are you thinking about them equally with the consumer? And I'd love to hear a little bit more about how you think about that. And the reason why is because it affects my business as well. I do custom framing, and we work with artists, and we also work with consumers. So, and a few Etsy shops. So like,
Sure.
I'm always struggling as a small business. Like, I have this much money to put into development. I want to, try something, iterate, learn. But a lot of times, you have to pay a developer, graphic designer, et cetera, when you don't have the budget. And so it's like, how do you think about those problems?
Sure. Well, the first answer, which is probably not particularly helpful, but is honest, is it depends. This is the nature, so I've learned this a lot of times. So before I worked at Etsy, I'd started with another guy a website called Supermarket, which was also a 2-sided marketplace, and we grew this sort of, from the ground up. So I saw the mechanics of starting this thing where there's kind of 2 customer types right from the beginning. So I've seen it in this sort of very small, intimate way where we were able to talk to literally every person who used the thing until that grew for a while. And then Etsy, where I sort of stepped into an environment where there was already hundreds of thousands of sellers at the time I got there. And we want to help the sellers start and run independent creative businesses. And so they in some ways are the primary customer. I would say a challenge is that sometimes what is best for the marketplace overall, which is ultimately good for most sellers or something, requires optimizing things for the buying experience, right? Because one of the things we offer Etsy sellers is all of the people who come to Etsy to look for stuff. That doesn't guarantee that they will somehow buy something, but one of the many things within our offering is the insane amount of traffic that comes to this marketplace, right? And so the buyers are kind of they're a component of what we have to offer our sellers, if that makes sense. So I would say that in general, it's the goal is to help the sellers succeed, but sometimes the path to helping the sellers succeed is optimizing what a shopping or searching experience looks like for buyers. And sellers may actually perceive that thing very differently. What they think search should be or how they want to be found or discovered in it may not actually match the dynamics of the marketplace that would actually make them more successful. And it's extremely complicated, like sort of there's a ton of different dynamics happening within the marketplace. So to try to explain them in a way that makes sense for every single individual person's business is not really something that's possible. So sometimes we just have to optimize for the shopping experience because we believe that's what's best for the sellers' businesses overall. Yep.
Just had
There
to
was
be
a
on the
hand
other
there.
side. So can you pass it down?
This is good, yeah.
Hi, Randy. As a person who is interested in becoming a creative director, I'd like to hear a little bit about a day in the life of what you do on a daily basis.
Oh,
And-
sure, yeah.
And if you could kind of expand on what you think are the most important skills that you utilize as a creative director.
Sure. Well, from the if you were to observe, my day looks like being in meetings, writing and reading at the computer or on my iPad. Like that's what it looks like. Right? And I say that like I don't know, jokingly. That is exactly what it looks like, but I love it. Yeah. What I mean, essentially, I'm a people manager more than like that's probably the bulk of the time. I would say is helping lead groups of people, helping sort of set, helping them set the vision for the areas that they're responsible for working in, and then giving them the resources or encouragement or feedback they need to help accomplish those things. Sort of, it's my responsibility to, like, as I encourage them to define those things, to shape the definition of those things to serve the overall needs of Etsy. What I probably spend less time doing, but is probably similar in its sort of value contribution, is working across the company with the leaders of other areas, whether it's finance or the engineering team, our international operations, customer support, whatever those things are. Either to collaborate with them on projects, just sort of empathize with their situation in the context of the business, identify opportunities to help solve their problems through design, or any sort of variety of other stuff. That's a lot of listening, Yeah. So when it goes to the skills, I'd say listening, empathy, clear communication, and then the design component is that I've been a designer, right? There's sort of it's the one part is probably taste, right? Or some sort of aesthetic sensibility, particularly one that aligns with Etsy in some way. Like that, there's a fairly natural fit there. I wouldn't say that like the Etsy brand is my own sort of personal taste writ large, but they're very close, right? I'm not doing some like emotional leap to wear this other thing that's very different from how I sort of see the world. It's very, very close. So that makes that part actually fairly natural. Like I don't think about that as much. And I've kind of built up a team of people that are similar as well, right? So that my sort of ambition in doing that is to allow us to focus on the hard, meaty problems and not on the sort of like bickering about some aesthetic choice. Like we generally are kind of like operating in the same space. So I'm sort of punting as much as possible on the like, I like this one, I don't like that one. Like that doesn't matter. We're sort of all, we're all making Etsy stuff. The other thing I think is a certain, well, at least in the context of Etsy, because we've been growing the entire time I've been there, there's a whole set of skills related to recruiting. Because at least the way we built the design teams has been all outbound and proactive. We don't really have like job listings. I mean, every once in a while we'll do something like that to see what happens, but we don't particularly put job listings up. I'm usually like looking constantly. Usually starts online, sometimes through other connections, and then a whole series of processes and things we've developed that are very people-centric. They involve like lots of lunches and meetings and beers and show me your work and meet this person. It's a little more formal than that, but the recruiting thing has been key because it's, again, sort of like this people-focused thing. A lot of it is investing a ton of energy up front and selecting what I believe to be the right type of people and then investing in their sort of well-being and development. Yeah. It was a long answer, sorry. There's a lot of things in there. There's probably 5 other things I forgot. Don't be scared of the mic. Also, you don't need it. I got you.
I'm pretty loud. Just two questions. One, to follow up on how you involve your sellers. Do you have like a panel of sellers that are that you take feedback from? And then the second one was a little bit about how your research, your UX research team is structured and what they're working on.
Sure. I mean, your second question is part of the answer to the first question. So we actually do have this thing we call the seller panel, but that gets it's sort of one of many things in the research toolkit, if that makes sense, or the sort of feedback toolkit. There's a whole variety of ways we get, unsolicited feedback through support channels or Twitter or things like that, which is one source. We get solicited feedback when we ask people. So part of the research team, we have sort of quantitative research, basically doing survey design and things like that, and those sort of targeted at different segments and things. We sort of recruit into those. And then we do a variety of other things. Where there's this sort of UX stuff, which will answer your separate question or your second question. We're showing people prototypes or giving them demo products, or doing ethnographic studies, revisit them where they work, all sorts of things. And then there are a whole variety of other ways that we get exposed to sellers and their feedback. So we bring sellers through the Etsy office regularly. It's actually a person whose full-time job is primarily like bringing sellers in for people who work at Etsy to meet and interact with. When we're at the point where a part of the software or something exists as like a feature, we often launch these sort of like prototype features and invite people in. So we sort of like go deep in the community, like in the forums where people are very engaged. We might announce that we're starting this new prototype group. And if they want to join it, they can. So this stuff's very self-selecting there, right? It's like different than running a sort of blind experiment or something. But we get feedback about them using those features and things there. So there's a whole variety of stuff. I mean, if I just describe it like that, it sounds like a grab bag, but there's different sort of methodologies and reasons related to those that we would like pick and choose based on the nature of the problem or what we know about it. If it's something we haven't done before and we're considering investing a lot of energy into it, that's like a different kind of research than maybe iterating or refining a feature that already exists or something like that. And then our research team is basically split into two parts: what we call UX research, and then what we call market research. And on the UX research side, it's essentially aligned with these other like product areas. We have parts that we have payments, seller tools, mobile, etc. And we essentially align researchers with those areas and have them embedded in the teams. So they sit side by side with the product managers, engineers, designers, etc. And they're kind of like peer members of the team, but they all, from an organizational standpoint, are part of this research team. So they share like common methodologies, and they sort of publish their findings and insights in similar forms in a similar place. So there's sort of like a hub to go to of like user insights. Hope that's helpful. Yeah. That's also maybe just one interesting detail as we find another question. That's fairly new for us, at least at that degree of sophistication. It's probably we've had a real research team for maybe a year, and we're going into like our 10th year.
So then are you using like an MPT tool on the front end when you're talking about your iterating of your different software launches?
We have a lot of almost all the sort of tools we use to do those things we've built in-house, and that's actually much more sophisticated. We've been doing those things for quite a long time. So sort of data-informed and data-driven like software development is pretty core to our working process. Yes.
Hi.
And you're standing.
I'm standing. I have a question also related to having a shop on Etsy and being a seller. I've had really super positive experiences as being a consumer, and I haven't had negative experiences as a seller, but as someone who is running their own small business, in Denver, it feels kind of overwhelming to be a part of this community that I forget the number of people that you said were, selling work on your website. Do you have any tips or tricks, or you were saying that there's someone whose entire job is to talk to sellers and see, get feedback from them. Is there anything that someone who's working on a very small level, like, would maybe just not think of that would really, be helpful in getting their shop started, or I don't know, just a little
Sure.
some insider.
Yeah.
information.
I mean, it's interesting. Well, I'll give you three quick answers. So one is, there's a huge community of Etsy teams, and I don't know if you've ever interacted with the ones locally. I'm sure there are more than one in Denver. If you go to etsy.com/teams, you can like search for local area. And these are other Etsy sellers. These are self-organized groups, often geographic, sometimes sort of thematic, sometimes both. So you might find, the Denver Screen Printers Etsy team or something. And I mean, it's like any other online community. Like they're sort of defining what happens there, but often tends to be technical tips, like resource sharing, or learning about marketing and stuff like that. Right? Those are particularly helpful, one, because they're people you can meet in person, which can be nice, but also they're often interested in the same sort of domain you are, right? So a frame seller and a furniture maker aren't dealing with the same problems, right? So it's hard to have a generic answer about those things. One person might be trying to sell $2,000 items and they're excited if they sell one a week, and somebody's trying to sell paper goods and they're hoping to sell 20 a day, and they're just dealing with a very different set of dynamics. So Etsy teams. If you go to your sort of Etsy, there's a dashboard in your seller sort of tools, and there's a stream of sort of seller education content in there that can be particularly helpful when you're getting started. And then I'll give you a third thing, which is really a product feature suggestion. We have this concept called promoted listings, which is essentially like, it's almost like Google AdWords or something like that in the context of the Etsy community. It'll sort of like auto bid on keywords and things like that. What works in this scenario is that everyone's interests are highly aligned. So we only deliver super relevant promoted listings to people. This all sort of happens in the context of search or something. So you get really relevant listings as a shopper, you get promoted as a seller, and then for us, more shoppers are finding more sellers, so the transactions are happening. So it's a pretty sort of virtuous cycle product. So that's something to maybe look into too if you're not already using it. Yeah. How are we on time? Yeah, close? A few more minutes? Two more questions. Perfect.
In regards to other pursuits, when you come up with a really good outside thing, what kind of urgency does it have for you? Do you lose sleep over it, or you just figure it's going to get done sooner or later?
It's a mix, honestly. I think I keep a list of all these things. Well, that's a whole separate conversation. My list making is another thing entirely. But I have a list of these projects, and I have a sort of methodology where I review all my lists once. It's once every 2 weeks by default. Every list. This isn't a piece of software. Again, super dorky thing. So I revisit every one of these things regularly and kind of choose whether to take action on them or not. I find that helps me have like a healthy relationship with them because the conditions around them change. Like I recently got married or something. I had this project I've been chipping away at for well over a year. And as my wedding got closer, it just wasn't reasonable to make any more progress on that. There's just other priorities. So I don't, sometimes I feel a lot of urgency, but I would say in general, they happen over a longer arc. That urgency probably like comes in waves. Like I have the idea, I might dump a bunch of initial stuff, whatever that is, whether it's sketches or lists of things, or start talking to people to try to make something happen. But it could sit there for another year and a half or something before I pick it up again. Yeah, that's an interesting question. I didn't think about it. Yeah. There's a lot of things that could be finished. I think there's one more question, maybe. Yeah. Awesome.
I'm getting there.
Oh, right. The micro.
Chubby guy speed walking, so be patient.
I understand that you used to run a record label.
That-
And I would like to know, is that a side project or a not side project? And can you tell us a little bit more about
That's
that
good.
experience?
That was a side project, I'd say. Yeah. That was also quite a long time ago. Was definitely a side project. I thought of it like a business, but I had no idea what I was doing. And basically, every time we would make just enough money to put out the next record. We put out like 8 records over maybe 3.5 years or something like that. So it wasn't a huge, every 6 months or something like that. Whatever I was into at the time. It was, I don't know, you'd probably call it indie rock in today's terms or something. They're rock bands mostly. Yeah. Yeah. It was probably, oh God, I was so young. It was 2000, 2001, somewhere in there, yeah.
And then, sorry, last thing.
This thing?
In your peer group,
Yeah.
do you find referencing 2000s and saying, oh, so long ago, do people make fun of you? Because I do that and I get made fun of all the time.
Huh.
Because when you're not that old and you've succeeded and gotten a lot of places, your history's not long enough to talk like it's old. But you have to because you've done so much.
Yeah. I don't know. I feel, my wife will say the same thing. I'm kind of like an old man. So I feel like, I think at least in my internal dialogue, I have no conflict in thinking about something as a long time ago. Yeah. I'm just like, yeah, I don't know.
Sometimes I say it's the 90s just to sound old.
No, you can't do that. Oh, man. Yeah. This is a lot of fun. Thanks for the questions and stuff. It was great. Thank you.